Good evening and welcome to CBS News Detroit at 5. I'm Terrence Friday.
I'm Shayna Humphreys. Today, Oakland County Circuit Judge Kwame Rowe sentenced the Oxford High School shooter to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The shooter opened fire at the high school on November 30th of 2021, killing 4 students and injuring 7 other people. The shooter was 15 at the time and pleaded guilty to 4 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of terrorism resulting in death, 7 counts of assault with intent to murder, and multiple firearm charges.
In September, Judge Rowe determined in a Miller hearing that the shooter was eligible for the maximum sentence, and today he handed down multiple sentences of just that, life without the possibility of parole. Ray Strickland has been following the proceedings from outside of the courthouse today, and our Gino Vici has been listening to the testimony as it plays out inside of that courtroom. We're going to start our team coverage with Ray.
And Terrence, I can tell you it was not surprising to hear the impact that this shooting has had on the victims' families, their friends, students who survived the shooting, and the entire Oxford community. But what was surprising was that we did get a chance to hear from the shooter himself. And what he said was even more surprising because he took accountability for his actions. He even said, quote, that I'm a terrible person. And he even had empathy for the damage that he caused to these families and everyone else who was affected. He even said that his parents were to blame for the shooting, that, again, he was taking accountability for his own actions. But he did also say that he was trying to be a better person. And that was something that his defense was trying to convey to the judge. But the judge even said during when he handed down the sentence that the shooter had multiple times to walk away. He had multiple times to not do what he did. But even after firing that first shot, he continued to shoot many other students. He even talked about the trauma, the deep depression that he has caused the community. And he even said that Ethan, again, was responsible for what he did. So just, again, listen to what Ethan had to say, and we even got some sound from the judge as well.
I am a really bad person. I have done terrible things that no one should ever do. I have lied, been not trustworthy. I've hurt many people, and that's what I've done, and I'm not denying it, but that's not who I plan on to be. Whatever sentence it is, I do plan to be better.
This act involved extensive planning, extensive research, and he executed on every last one of the things that he planned. He could have changed his mind. Unfortunately, after shooting the first person, Phoebe Arthur, he could have changed his mind at that point, but he didn't.
Now, as you just heard, there was remorse from the shooter, but even as the parents were speaking during those impact statements, they said that he will not be forgiven. Now I want to send it over to my colleague, Gino Vici, who has more from those impact statements from inside the courtroom. Gino.
Thanks, Ray. You know, there were lots of them. It was a very emotional day inside the courtroom. We listened to dozens of impact statements, all of them giving us insight into the pain and heartache that has endured since November 30th, 2021. Rena St. Juliana was one of the first people to speak. She talked for a few minutes, also read a statement from her mother. Of course, Rena is the sister of Hannah St. Juliana, one of 4 students killed in the shooting. In that statement that she read from her mother, Rena talks about her sister, someone she says was the greatest gift she's ever had.
Instead of speaking at her wedding, I spoke at her funeral. Instead of fishtailing her hair for a game, I curled her hair in a casket. Doesn't matter if I go to her room to steal her clothes, show her an outfit, or ask for advice. I am met with silence and darkness. I pushed off getting my license because what was the point? She's not here to sit in the passenger seat. I couldn't go back to school and finish my high school years. I'd see all of Hannah's classmates, my classmates, get their homecoming, their sports games, their prom, and their graduation when Hannah doesn't. I refuse to decorate the Christmas tree. That is what we do with Hannah. My brother asked me to still continue our traditions, but I can't. I can't be a good sister for him because that is what Hannah and I did together. Each day is just going through the motions because apparently we're still supposed to go on.
So very sad, so heartbreaking to listen to these families have to go through this again, relive November 30th, 2021 all over again. But perhaps this is the start of what the families say they've desperately needed for the past 2 years. The Oxford shooter being sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, which means the closure can finally begin. Terrence, Shayna, back to you.
All right, Gino Vici and Ray Strickland live tonight from the Oakland County Circuit Courthouse. Thank you both.
Now, we just received a statement from Oakland County Sheriff Mike Bouchard. He says, quote, "I applaud Judge Rowe for doing the courageous thing, the appropriate thing on behalf of the victims of these horrible crimes. By his actions on November 30th, 2021, and his own statements, this defendant deliberately carried out his cold-hearted, evil, and brutal plan and was excited about killing his fellow students."
He said he was prepared to spend the rest of his life in prison. It is appropriate that the system granted his wish. I hope that the families of Tate, Hannah, Madison, and Justin, and those other victims of this defendant can now take one more step towards processing this unthinkable tragedy, end quote.
And we continue our coverage now with our legal panel. We have Judge Kenneth King of the 36th District Court and attorney Sanford Shulman, who has extensive experience in Miller hearings in particular. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Judge King, if I could ask you, give us an idea of the purpose of hearings like this. What is the point in asking the victims to really share in their own words exactly what they've gone through? And can you tell us, does a judge typically have his mind made up when he walks into the room on a day like this?
I think in large part the judge does have their mind made up, but it does help to get these responses from the victims' families to solidify me in a position or have the public understand why it is that I'm doing what I'm doing.
All right, I hate to interrupt you. I think we're having an issue with your mic. We can't hear you. So we're going to work on that. Sanford, while we're working on getting that audio together, what is the purpose really of having the hearing work out this way?
Well, it's much for the victim and their family. It's a time for them to get closure, to speak their mind. The judge has a lot of discretion on how he's going to conduct these hearings. I would most interested in maybe the judge, when he gets his mic working, might address this, is where was the issue of the rehabilitation? And I know it's a sensitive issue. You don't want to humanize the defendant, but that is why we were in this hearing. Miller says that one of the factors is, can he be rehabilitated? Is there a possibility that a juvenile, a child, can be rehabilitated? And if not, and in those small amount of cases, those few cases, that they are now sentenced to mandatory life. So my question really is, although you don't want a person convicted of such a heinous crime to have any chance if you're part of the families that have experienced this, but the U.S. Supreme Court said that juveniles will no longer be automatically sentenced to mandatory life unless they cannot have any chance of rehabilitation. He's been in jail for about a year or two. Where was any of that in this record? I know there's a lot of emotion, but where was anything that he cannot be rehabilitated when he's 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years old? That doesn't mean you get paroled. That means you have a chance at parole in 40 years. And I didn't hear that, and that was the question.
I think Judge Rowe made a point in laying out that this isn't your typical 15-year-old kid that did this, that the amount of planning that went into it, the execution, and then his behavior even after the fact and while in the Oakland County Jail doesn't sound like someone who's going to be rehabilitated successfully. Mm-hmm. And I think his attention to detail and laying out why he was ruling in the way that he did was tantamount. He talked about that the purpose is not only rehabilitation, but it's also punishment. Mm-hmm. And it also is supposed to serve as a deterrent effect, mm-hmm. not only to the person who did the crime, but to others who may follow suit in the future.
Yeah, the judge was inundated with a lot of information throughout this case. Hearing from the shooter himself just moments before that ruling came down, do you feel like that had any impact on everything that he said as far as his decision?
I think it does, because whenever I hear from a defendant, I'm paying very close attention to what they're saying and how they're saying it. If there's any amount of disingenuous to it in what he's saying, or if he's coming across as being very genuine and remorseful. And I think we saw a little bit of that, aside from the fact that he stood there the entire time with his head down. Mm-hmm. And he sounded like a person who was looking for perhaps some sympathy. He sounded almost suicidal to me, that I'm a bad person. I deserve to be sentenced to life without parole.
Yeah, it was hard to listen to watch. And very much a juxtaposition compared to what we have seen in his apparent body language in most of this. Sanford, what did you make of that moment? And especially when he said, I want whatever the families and the victims want, which has been made very clear all day. They don't want him to ever have a chance to get out, and that's exactly what he got. What was the purpose in him standing up and saying, throw away the key?
It was a surprise in a couple of fashions. First of all, the judge had given the defense sort of the illusion that he was still considering a possible sentence of less than mandatory life. And if that's the case, then the defendant may be encouraged to speak. But he spoke without notes, and he didn't seem to have been properly prepared. Some of his comments were, whatever the family feels is appropriate, I'm good with that. It didn't seem like that. Also, he sounded articulate. And quite frankly, if he's a 15-year-old, he didn't look like a 15-year-old in there. But he seemed to have made great strides from apparently what he had been like when he got into this case. So his maturity and maybe his outlook was important. But I think in the end, his comments did not really impress the court. In fact, seconds after he spoke, the judge spoke for about 15, 20 minutes in what I thought was already prepared remarks. But nevertheless,
Absolutely.
He did speak, and he spoke, but I didn't think it was very effective, and I didn't think he was properly prepared.
Yeah, Mr. Shulman, you've spoken extensively about the purpose of those Miller hearings
Yeah.
to get a better idea of who that young person is. When we saw a lot of that evidence, a lot of it was really just hard to believe, some of the heinous and hateful things that he said.
Right.
But then hearing him today, it almost peels back some of the layers. Is that kind of in line with what you were saying was the whole point of having the Miller hearing?
It is. In fact, there were some juvenile lifers who were at the courthouse.
Yeah.
And that's remarkable because these people were probably 40, 50 years from their cases, and they know what they looked like that day when they were in court. And I know Judge King has seen those individuals. And now you fast forward it. So what, this defendant, what would he be like in 10, 20 years? Well, look where he's come in 2 years. There was an advocate who spoke how differently he has been. We don't want to humanize them. I know when the victim's families speak, they don't want to hear any of that. But that's the law. Are juveniles, are children going to be receiving mandatory life sentences if they have no chance of rehabilitation? That's the question.
I understand Mr. Shulman's position, and given that he's a defense attorney, I expect that. But I can't say that I would have ruled any differently than Judge Rowe, given all the information that came forward about how he conducted himself before, during, and after the crime. This isn't your typical 15 or 17-year-old kid now. This person looks like a diabolical monster, and the public needs to be protected from someone like that. And whether it's 10 years from now, 40 years from now, whatever the case may be, I wouldn't want Ethan Crumley living next door to me.
Yeah, one of the things he said that was pretty striking was, I can't blame my parents. I lied to them. It's not their fault. Without jumping too much into the next chapter of this prosecution story, is that going to become evidence in the parents' case now?
No, I don't think that necessarily become evidence, but it's going to be the issue, is whether they had causation for his conduct, and how much do we hold responsible third parties for other people's conduct.
I wonder if they'll call him as a witness.
Well,
that's possible.
Yeah, unlikely he'll testify in a case like that. His case might very well be reviewed in the future, and the defense will want to limit what he has to say. But I think in the end, the question today was, would a judge in 20 or 30 years look at him differently? It's interesting, Judge King's comments, because I've seen transcripts from juvenile lifers when they were sentenced, in the comments of the court, you're worthless, you're nothing. And then when 20 years later or 30 years later, a different judge will say, wow, you are so different. You've committed these heinous crimes, but you changed your whole outlook. Your brain is different. Your body, your whole life, your outlook, everything you've done is different. But that's humanizing the defendant. That was not the day. Today, he was not going to be humanized.
No, not at all. And before we do wrap up quickly, you mentioned this may be reviewed again. Is there any chance for appeal or for any different outcome?
The appeal might crawl their way up to the federal court, where the question is can judges, without any proof of record of someone being rehabilitated with such a small record, is that sufficient for this judge to have found that he has no chance of rehabilitation? That's in the short run. In the long run, the question is, are we going to sentence juveniles to mandatory life in general? Many states, most states have banned it. Most countries don't even consider it. And Michigan is one of the leading states that have so many juveniles in prison. And so these are tough legal questions that we're going to have to deal with in the future.
I think one of the more immediate questions, though, is that's something that Ethan Crumley is going to even want to pursue. Given that he's taken full responsibility for what he's done, is he even going to want to appeal? And from what I've seen so far, it doesn't look like it.
Sure.
And I think that lies with him, whether it goes any further than this.
Sure.
Judge King, Sanford, Shulman, thank you so much, both of you, for joining us. We have much more coverage to come of the hearing today.